I am so delighted to welcome Mr. Santosh Saligram and Shripathy Hadigal. So, how do I begin? You all know they're writers, poets, photographers, blah blah blah. Their biography will give you all the details, but let me try to introduce them in a very different way. Both of them are ardent lovers of our planet. They deeply care about Earth. So they're truly, in every sense of the word, Earth children. They are also enablers of fabulous experiences, if you may, because through their writing, through their sometimes shoddy poetry and great prose and amazing photography, for between them maybe like 35 years of experience as artists. 15 Shripathy and more than 20 from Santosh Saligram. Okay, we have cats. So something that I'm forgetting here is the fact that Shripathy Hadigal is an astrophotographer. This is something I really want to talk about because he's not just chasing the spine of the Milky Way, He's actually someone who studied in International Space University. So he's someone who understands everything that you can see and things that are surreal, ethereal as well. So I was pretty envious of him when he got to do this interview because I wanted to interview Santosh. But being his wife and all, they said, it's better if someone else does it. So Shripathy is here. And a couple of days ago, Shripathy and I had a conversation about what kind of questions we should ask, because some of you are already from the wildlife community, but some of you aren't. So when I was having a conversation with him, I realized he's actually the best person to do this interview because I'm more of an insider, and the questions that Shripathy has come up with are really amazing, and I'm really excited to see how the course of this conversation will be like. So what will happen now is we will have Saligram and Hadigal in conversation with each other. It's going to be a very spontaneous, extemporary thing. They'll be speaking with each other for about 45-50 minutes, after which the floor will be open to questions from you guys, and I really hope to make the best time. Ask all the controversial ones. It's wildlife tourism, so I welcome you to ask questions later. So yeah, without much further ado, here we go.
Thank you. Great introduction. Before we start, you see the book here, the cover, and many of you already know Santosh. The book is about safari, right? And just taking a step back, what's the root word for safari? Anyone? I'm sure many of you know. Safar, which is in Arabic origin, meaning journey. And actually then the safari really became safari when in Kiswahili, the word Kisafari means like real journey. But unfortunately, over the last few years, safari has really, narrowed down to only pictures and 600 millimeters, 800 millimeter, or Bandhavgarh. It all became very, I think we narrowed down the word. I don't think there would have been a better time to actually talk about the book, because this book is really about journey, not just journey in the forest, but also an internal journey that Santosh must have gone through in the last 20 years. So it's a privilege to talk to you, Santosh, about the journey and the nuances that you have brought in the book is just amazing, and most importantly, I think bringing justice to the word safari. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to give a context, I'm sure many of you already ordered the book and might have come yesterday or day before yesterday. Not many of you have finished the book. So this book is a novella, and when they asked me, do you want to talk about it? And I thought novella, maybe a few pages, and it's a safari. It's a story of a safari, right? 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, maybe a 20-page, 30-page, 40-page. And when I got to know it's 180 pages, then I was sure, it's going to be really great. And I think the book is, I don't know how many of you watched Dunkirk, the movie from Christopher Nolan, which is all about time scales, right? Something happens in a rush in 3 hours, 4 hours, in 1 hour, then something happens in a week. I think Santosh has made a 3 to 4 or 5 hour journey into a journey of lifetime of the 3 amazing characters who come in the book. You actually get to know through his eyes and through his writing their life. I don't want to reveal what are those characters. It's going to come in the conversation, but I think the book is not about the 3 or 4 hours. It's actually a journey of a lifetime of all these characters. So thank you for writing, first of all. Now, coming to the first question, a Bangalore boy, right? I mean, I think you grew up here and being here, you know, in your childhood days, and now in the last 20, 30 years, I think you've been in the wild, probably have really, I think every part of you is really soaked in that the wilderness that's there. And also the genre that you have taken, it's wildlife fiction. I mean, we all grew up, many of us read Kenneth Anderson, Jim Corbett, right? I mean, it's all like the man-eaters of, you know, the forest was always something which is like wild and, you know, horrific, and you really get scared. But then comes Santosh, 2024, and I don't know when you started this book, but it's a great journey. So yeah, so why did you write this book? Why this genre? It's a very complex and never heard of a genre. And I think also, just in the previous conversation, I was hearing that even Mr. Ram Guha was telling that it's a very difficult genre to talk about. Yes, Santosh, like why this book and why now and why you?
Sure. No, first of all, good evening to you, Shripathy, and thank you so much for hosting this, and good evening to everyone present here. Saturday evenings are valuable as it is, so thank you for spending it here. So perhaps most of us expect a very fancy answer, like this is a very little explored genre, and that's true actually. It was very surprising for me too when I tried to look it up. I think Ruskin Bond has done a little bit of nature-based fiction, and somewhere either F.W. Champion, I think surprisingly, who was the pioneer of camera trap photography back in the 1910s or 20s, has written a sprinkling of wildlife fiction. But in terms of contemporary, relevant, realistic wildlife fiction, it's virtually non-existent, honestly. But that's not really the reason I wrote it. I think there were two reasons. One is I didn't have a choice, honestly. It's just the way it came to me. I mean, I think as artists, we often talk about art happening to us and we not being the creators of it. That was absolutely true in this case. I could almost hear the words in my brain being dictated to me, and then my fingers just followed suit and typed it out. But later when I analyzed why perhaps at some subconscious level this may have happened, why I didn't just go about rambling about my real experiences in non-fiction, I think fiction provides a sort of framework which is more flexible to creative storytelling, which non-fiction does not really. In the sense that when you attempt literary fiction and realist fiction, you certainly want to retain a huge element of truth in what you're writing, because the whole point is to keep it relevant and relatable, but it also gives you the room to take it to the extreme, push it, so that you kind of make the point you want to make. I think I heard a screenwriter talk about this once, which is why a story works is precisely because of this combination. If it's too realistic, then people find it very boring because they're already very familiar with it. Yeah. It's very mundane. But if it's too fantastical and not relatable, of course we would tend to think of a movie like Lord of the Rings as very fantastical, but it's actually got very, very relatable ideas and values. So fiction allows you to combine the two things in a very nice balance, which is probably why I ended up doing this.
Fantastic. I think one thing you said on real experiences. I don't think at any point in the book it feels like it's not real. Everything that's there, it's just so real, even though it's a fiction. Now, talking about experiences, one thing about the book, I think the details in which you have described things in the forest. I mean, be it the jeep, the metallic box you sit in, or it's a bird that just flew in, or the conversation that an elephant has inside, you know, itself. And I think the nuance that you brought in, it's almost, and to be, I think to just set the context, I've never been in a safari. So I think I'm really new to it. And this was really painting a 360 degree sort of a VR, virtual reality pictures. So I'm going on a jeep. He was going in 80 kilometers, which is not allowed, but still he was going. But then suddenly time stops. And then you hear this conversation, the sounds and the smell, and I mean, it's amazing. So just want to know how spiritual it was for you, because it's amalgamating, it's really bringing in your 20 years of experiences in the wilderness, not as a photographer, not just as a guide, it's something beyond. I mean, it's Santosh being in the middle of everything happening in the wild. So how spiritual was it? Like, how was it? Yeah.
Certainly spiritual. Like I mentioned, um, I was largely absent while writing the book, honestly. My body was definitely present because it typed the story out, but otherwise I did not put any conscious thought into this. But apart from spiritual, I would use the word visceral. I think I could feel being in that jeep every moment, which is very spooky, honestly. I have goosebumps right now thinking about it. I think part of that is because the temporality of the story, which you spoke about, right, is very, very reflective with utmost faithfulness to how a safari actually happens. I don't know how many of you here have been on safari, especially in central India. I think I already know a few faces who have been. Yes, of course, Trishala and Pramod and a few other people, Gautam, of course, quite often. If you draw a graph of how it works, especially in tiger territory, it's typically a flat line, flat line, flat line, and then you have a spike, a huge spike at that, and then again flat line in terms of tiger activity and in terms of tiger tracking. So that temporality, I think, got imprinted into this story. So you have texture, 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 birds chirping, things happening, all other stuff in the backdrop, and suddenly there's a flurry of activity related to tigers. So I think that became very easy to then translate it into the story, because that is exactly how a safari works, and it's pretty much in my blood now, I think, by this time. So yeah,
great. I think it's sort of revealing layer by layer. Now I understand the story even better. Just as a follow-up question, let's travel back 20 years maybe, right? I mean, going into the wild and tiger, obviously it's tiger. You go there for tiger, and the whole sort of tourism we are talking about here, the tiger-centric tourism, right? But I think one thing that the book brings out really, really nicely is how in the whole flurry of, you know, the emotional flurry of looking at a tiger, we missed other things in the wild. So for Santosh, a young Santosh, I know you're still young, but younger Santosh 20 years ago when the journey started, right? So how did you, how was it? I mean, I'm sure tiger was there, like, you know, you've written Tiga tales, like many of them, but yeah, so how did you actually, how it evolved from just being tiger to everything else?
In fact, funnily enough, I think it happened the other way around. In the sense, I was fortunate to go into the jungles from a very young age, thanks to my maternal uncles. And so I had seen everything except tigers in the forest. I mean, not literally everything, of course, but I had seen a lot of other things. And it was a huge culture shock when I first went on what is called a tiger safari, because I had been on censuses, I had been on treks, I had been on mountaineering expeditions and all sorts of stuff. And yet, in South India back then, it was virtually impossible to see a wild tiger unless you spent maybe a month in the forest. I mean, of course, these days Kabini is very famous, Bandipura is very famous, and rightly so. But back then, Kabini was largely known for elephants. There used to be a huge congregation, especially in the summer, on the banks of the Kabini due to the prolific growth of bamboo, and of course the presence of water in the summer due to the backwaters. So as a result, it wasn't at all easy to see a tiger in the jungles of southern India. So when I first went to Madhya Pradesh, a park called Kanha Tiger Reserve, it was a massive culture shock, because I don't know if I can say this, but at some stage we used to say, people from Frank Anthony Public School used to use the F word like a space bar. Here in Madhya Pradesh, the word tiger is used like a space bar. You know, every other word is tiger. Wow. You go to the lodge, and the person serving your food is asking you, okay, how many tigers have you seen, and did you see a tiger this afternoon? And it's all in multiple numbers, sometimes even in dozens. And of course, I used to follow a few people's blogs online where they used to talk about seeing 16 tigers on a trip and so on. I was just absolutely astounded. How is this even possible? So I could experience that when I first visited Kanha, and elsewhere it is said that if you see a tiger, you're very lucky. There in central India, if you didn't see one, you're unfortunate. So that was a massive culture shock, and it was actually the other way around for me. Tigers happened much later.
Wow, that's, I think, very interesting, and also the diversity that you just brought about in terms of how the experience started from being in the wild itself, right? I think it's come out really, really well in the book, and obviously in all the characters. So now I think let's talk about the characters. I don't know how, I mean, if you have read Purnachandra Tejasvi, prolific Kannada writer, and there were these amazing books he wrote in which characters like Mandana, his from Malna, like from the Western Ghats, but the philosophy inside him, right? The things that he knew about nature, about the Western Ghats, about the animals, about everything else. Your characters bring that. I mean, they're witty, they're very philosophical, spiritual. They're the best naturalists. Now, when I was reading it, because I started knowing you as a photographer. I started following you, I don't know, like 13, 14 years ago. And then I started reading what you write on those pictures, photographer, writer. Then with few conversations, I knew you also have a very interesting philosophy to talk about as well. Now these characters, let's talk about the characters, especially Bhole Ram and Makhan. So one is a guide, one is a driver. So you read about who is driver and who is the guide. Now let's talk about them. How did you paint those characters? Like what was going through you? Because one thing I want to really add over here is it's not just a plain guide or a driver. It really brings in the nuances of their life. They're like, why are they there? I mean, they could have taken any other job. So yes, I mean, just talk about those two characters and how much of yourself were actually there in their shoes when you're writing it. So if you can just elaborate a bit on that.
First of all, the guides and drivers of our forests in the tiger ecotourism, let's say, universe, are some of the most brilliant people that I have met anywhere in the world. And this is no exaggeration at all, trust me. It's not out of a weird sentimentality that I'm saying this, or especially because they're associated with my book. But I have learned some serious life lessons from some of them. And the amount of sheer humanity that is on show when you meet some of these people is just incredible, even though they have very little materially. So, of course, the nub of the story itself is about a situation where a tourist is on safari with a guide, and therefore a guide had to be there. But what I did not know at the beginning of the story was that there would be a driver also, in the sense, I mean, the guide was supposed to be the driver as well. There was only one character. But later I realized that there are unique nuances, unique challenges, unique perspectives, unique conflicts, very, very importantly, because conflict is the core of any story, which is interesting. So I just knew that there had to be a driver and a guide as well. Now these people with the characters in the book are extremely realistic. I mean, they seem fantastical because some of them seem to have some very idealistic qualities, like Maryada Purushottam kind of stuff. But I have seen genuinely such people. So I just had this, I don't know if you were going to ask me how this story actually took birth. Are you going to know, right? That you didn't have it. Okay, because that is linked to this characterization. I just had it as a little note in my phone as a stub because one day I just started wondering, because weird things happen to us when we are going about our chores, right? So I was either driving or doing something completely unrelated to writing, when I suddenly started wondering for no reason what would happen if one day a driver decided to be dishonest with his client. Because generally they are absolute paragons of virtue, as are most people, honestly. People who build our flyovers, like Jayant Kaikini has written very beautifully on these people. Bus drivers, for example, they don't sleep at night so that you can reach safe. So are guides and drivers. They try their absolute best to show you what you care about. And mostly it's tigers in most cases. But I started wondering what would happen if one day a person decided not to care for his client and actually actively decided to cheat him. So that is how the story actually took birth in my head, and then that led to everything else. Of course, I mean, it would be a spoiler if I mentioned here what the guide actually does or what the driver actually does. But all I can say is that the true character of both the guide and the driver actually do come out as do the character of most people when put through a test. So yeah, it's very realistic, and I suppose the way it ends is also realistic because that really is what happens in real life as well.
Should I tell? No, I'm not going to tell. No, I've heard. I think the profuse love you sort of get from the drivers and guides when you're there. It's I think it's come out so beautifully in the book, and I think when you read, there's some point in the book where the driver is talking about. He'll have a monologue. I mean, something goes in his mind. It's beautiful. It's like time stood still when everything else is happening so in a rushed manner, and then Yeah. And then
I have it on my lap.
amazing, yeah. So and then that monologue happens. So some of the best philosophical, sort of conundrums that happens in the mind, and I think you should read it to really get the feel of it. Now, just taking a bit deeper into it, right? So one of the things that really was the most favorite, one of the most favorite parts for me in the book is the whole socio-economic and socio-cultural, this sort of religious angle that you brought in the book about those, right? So I have a background in development sector. Like right now I work with, in NGOs, and there are a lot of things that we do with, livelihoods and how it's so important, and, for communities to have the sustainable livelihoods, especially in these sort of buffer zones and others. Now, through this journey, you've been in the wild. I don't think there's any, you've written so well, you've taken a lot of pictures on the wild and about wildlife, but when it comes to those nuances, right, the backstory of Makhan or backstory of Bhole Ram, so there is so many complex layers of disparities, and I think sort of in the back of the book you've written that as well. So how, I'm sure, I think you must have had a lot of conversations and everything, but if you just take us all through, how did you actually sort of internalize those things? It won't come in just one or two conversations, because you may spend few hours, or in your case you must have spent days with them as well. But to build that sort of camaraderie, to build that relation, to understand the nuances of those lives, and it has come brutally honest. It's very honest about their lives, as honest as you talk about tigers in the book. It's exactly the same with these lives as well. So if you can just want to talk about, just elaborate a bit about that as well.
Yeah, this question is very pertinent, because the popular model of tourism that we have adopted for the most part is sort of very surface level, where you kind of it's like going to the Taj Mahal. I don't know if you've ever been to the Taj Mahal. The route to it is extremely unsightly, to put it mildly, right? Whereas of course beyond that is a beautiful monument, but you just put horse blinkers and you completely shut your attention off it, and then you go see the beautiful monument, and then you come back out into the chaos and the dirt and everything. That's pretty much what happens in tiger tourism as well, where you kind of turn a blind eye to everything that's happening around this whole theater of wonderful things. Nice, yeah. The moment you go into the gate, you're just taken on this beautiful journey. It's like going to a planetarium and seeing all these celestial objects that you've never seen before. But that's the truth of the matter, and which is why when young people come to me and ask, okay, what should I do? Shouldn't I have a little bit of this also in my portfolio, that also in my portfolio? I say no. Focus on one thing, because when you do that, you kind of get depth. You actually tend to meet people, spend time with them, understand their difficulties, and the reality is that there is no wildlife without people. We tend to compartmentalize them to the extent of thinking of them as mutually exclusive. Yes, of course, they have to be mutually exclusive within protected areas, as of course my friends in conservation will elaborate very scientifically. But when it comes to realities where there is a certain intermingling or interface of humanity and wildlife, you cannot separate them. And therefore, if you kind of pay any sort of attention to a particular place over a period of time, it's not very difficult to understand the challenges there. And certainly in central India, these challenges are amplified, manifold, as they are in some parts of, let's say, the Mara, if some of you have been there, where the Masai, the local herdsmen, live a very, very different lifestyle from the person going and staying in a luxury 7-star lodge within the same territory. So it's just obvious and there to see. If you spend some time, it becomes very easy to pick on those things.
I think it's pretty evident in the book as well, the way the characters really sort of unravel in the book. Now, I think it's been a bit serious. I think the serious characters. Let's talk about the third character, but probably the hero in the book, Mr. Beg. I think you love him or you absolutely hate him. So when you read it, so let's talk about it. So also I think a little bit candid conversation as well. In all your journey, how did you encounter any Begs in your journey, and how did you actually confront them? Like, I'm sure there were many Begs, so yeah, just talk about it.
Yeah, in fact, I ran a poll the other day on Instagram where I asked people if they had been with a bad tourist, and I think 86% of them actually said yes. And it wasn't a small sample. I think some 40 or 45 people voted on that. So it seems to be pretty common. But in my case, yes, I've had difficult people who didn't really have much empathy for anything other than their own purpose of seeing as many tigers as possible, but none of the intensity of Mr. Beg, luckily. But again, because this is a story which needs to have certain things amplified to the maximum, like I said earlier, there are of course some exaggerations about Mr. Beg, but a lot of it has actually happened. For example, I don't think this is a spoiler. So the scene where he sounds off Makhan publicly, he gives him a public reprimand, I have actually witnessed it happening for no good reason. Again, only because the tourist was frustrated that he hadn't seen a tiger. And he gave the driver a dressing down for that reason in front of everyone, which is actually what gave me the idea of including that in the story. Yeah, I've had clients asking to leave a tiger in attendance, in the sense that we're actually watching a tiger and they've said, okay, no, let's just go from here because I want one more. I think for a lot of people it's that novelty, which also is a theme that I have explored, I think towards the beginning of the story. We are cultured to always seek something new. No matter how much we have, we always want something new. And I think obviously contemporary culture has really fueled that growth of, or that unsustainable growth, I think, or expectation of constant novelty, constant stimulation. But it certainly happens when it comes to tigers as well, which is a shame. It really is, because tigers give you an immense opportunity to get to know them, because they're so individual, just like these cats which were pottering around here. Just imagine them being amplified about 200 times. Each has a different temperament, each has a different way of conducting life, each has a different thing to add to your experience. So if you just spend time with one tiger for any length of time, it's amazing the kind of things that you learn. So it's a shame, but yeah, unfortunately that's how it is. But overall, I've never met someone of the intensity of Mr. Beg. Luckily.
Yeah, I hope you'll never. No, I think just to when you said the last point about tigers, I think apart from obviously Bhole Ram and Makhan, the other best philosophers in the book are actually the tigers and the elephants. I mean, you should. I think I don't know how Wes actually entered those minds and like read what was going through. In some cases, I just the sort of stills of Life of Pi came and went. A tiger, I don't know. That's something that I think was very visual as well, and especially when I think the confrontation between the elephant and tiger, that monologue happens inside elephant. It was there. It was really there. So how much time do we have? We have? Okay, great. So yeah, I think just one more sort of question that was really pondering when I was reading the book was the subtlety in the book, right? So the beauty of the book is, and especially when you write a genre like this, it's very easy to be highly opinionated, like, talk about, yes, this is wrong, this is right. And maybe some are right actually, and morally some are wrong as well. But then the beauty of the book really lies in the subtleties of things. It's never imposed. It's really left for the readers to what to sort of interpret on it. So was there a intention in doing so, or maybe I might have read it wrong? So what is it about? Like,
not really. It never. I mean, I never had a desire to pass a judgment on anything. Actually, not even Mr. Beg. If you read this story, even since you have, I'm sure you would agree that I don't judge Mr. Beg. In fact, amazingly enough, I know that you may call this extraordinarily spiritual, etc. Bhole Ram, who is the single biggest sufferer in the hands of Mr. Beg, does not judge him. Yeah. In fact, he even says so. I say so. The author says so at one point. I think it's because there's always different points of view, and obviously there are some non-negotiables which you cannot have a perspective on, which are universally, objectively wrong. Yeah. But I think when it comes to these contemporary situations, which are anything short of, let's say, genocide or something, there are always gray areas. And I think we kind of tend to stall the process of finding solutions if we condemn one side and glorify another, and so on. I think as authors, we have a very sacred duty to bring forth the truth. And the truth is that there are two sides to this. Actually, many, many more sides than just two to it. Only because of people like Mr. Baig, does a tourism universe exist? And because a universe exists around tourism, a lot of people make a livelihood from it. So tourism is not wrong. Tiger tourism is not wrong, because tigers are our most so-called charismatic. I know Saurabh doesn't like the term, but by charismatic we obviously mean something which has a lot of magnetic attraction to a large number of people. And the tiger has been voted, I think, more than 20 times by the WWF as the world's most popular animal. So certainly it's a very valuable way of adding to conservation. But the author's intent, I think, should be, or at least my intent was, to highlight certain things which could be improved, such as the economic disparity which you mentioned earlier, such as the tendency to subvert the very subject of our affection, which is the tiger, which is to cause harm to something which cannot be reversed and cannot be rejuvenated. So these are issues that I wanted to bring out without condemning someone completely, because then you lose that perspective altogether and then the story fails to remain relevant.
Okay. Oh, brilliant. So it reminds, I think, even after Oppenheimer, when I think Chris Nolan was interviewed, like, what do you want people to interpret, whether Oppenheimer was right or wrong? I think one thing he said was, I mean, creating the film is let people interpret, you know. I think it has really come out, you know, beautifully. I mean, as you said, even Bhole Ram doesn't judge. I mean, the amount of struggle he goes through. So now I think just coming to the sort of nuances of your writing itself, what were a couple of, you know, moments where you felt, okay, this is the difficult part in the story to write about? I mean, also if you can talk about how long it took to write, and also a couple of your favorite parts in the story. I mean, maybe if I'm sure you'll say it, like to say the way where it doesn't give the spoilers. So a couple of difficult moments while writing, and also some of your favorite moments in the book.
Right. I don't think I had any specific moments that were difficult, but certainly I asked myself a lot of difficult questions while writing the book. First of all, I asked myself, is this something that is actually going to harm the very thing that I love, the very people that I care about? Because if this is going to lead to tourism being banned, for instance, that's a pretty nasty outcome that I am not really desiring or expecting. Yeah. So I had to tread that very thin line between bringing issues to the fore and actually making them completely untenable. So that was a difficult part that I grappled with pretty much. But other than that, the book took about 3 months, I think, to write. I used to spend about 8 hours a day, every day, most days. In the beginning, I think Saurabh will be able to perhaps give you a more accurate picture, because I was, like I said, I was completely absent while writing it and have no idea how it happened. I could just hear certain words and I just wrote them down. And overall, it took about 3 months. Like, fortunately for me, I was in a period where I was between jobs at that time, happily unemployed. And I think this is why I asked Shashank the question when his book was released, how he was able to take time off to author a book while having a full-time job, because that's not easy. But luckily I was between jobs and it took about 3 months to write. Otherwise it was pretty straightforward. It was only these moral questions that I had to ask myself which posed the greatest difficulty.
I think I just was going through some of the lines I bookmarked, and I thought I would probably read a couple of them. I probably have like 35 of them. I just counted it. I think the book is, let's keep aside the tigers and you know, the characters and your experiences. All of it needed that sort of, you know, the tone of the story, the language in which you have written. I think it's a I don't know, I mean, I'm not too technical to talk about. I don't know, it's a visual poetry, because it really like brings the pictures so nicely and, you know, sort of goes away. So while writing, so was there any, I know you're a natural writer as well, but then was there any sort of specific thing that you have in your mind? Okay, the language that I use for this, because I think in a couple of places where you use sort of local dialect as well, the English that's spoken in that way. And also, I think what was really interesting was when we think of a Bhole Ram or Makhan, the way their thinking sort of, you know, has come in the book, it's very unique. The way that, you know, it's complex thought processes, it's multi-layered. And when we think about them, oh, just a driver. And I think you mentioned very nicely the government bus drivers who drive all through the night. I always wonder about it. Like, what's going on in their mind in that 7 hours of journey, just driving without going to sleep? We don't know it. But I think was there any sort of in your mind while you're writing, okay, when you're describing what's going on in Bake's mind or in the elephant's mind or tiger's mind? How did you pick the language? I mean, it could be a very sort of very basic question, but for me, I think it was personally, it was a very interesting choice of words that you've used. So how was it? Was it, yeah?
I mean, this was also a little tricky because obviously I am writing about a place where Hindi is the spoken language, and I had to convey somehow the same sort of essence in a completely alien language. But I didn't fuss myself too much over stylistic details. I just let the story guide me in terms of the authenticity of delivery of whatever each character wanted to say. So, of course, there's a lot of vernacular. So, the challenge was to, of course, somehow transcribe the essence of how it would be said in Hindi to English, which obviously is not even possible, I would say, except in places where I could recreate the sound of words being spoken while chewing pan, which of course Tez does, the character in the book, which is probably my favorite. Otherwise, one question actually many might ask me is, okay, how is it that Bhole Ram, who is just a village simpleton, able to articulate such complex ideas, because he does, and so does Makhan, in fact. Even though he's much younger than Bhole Ram, he's just this smart upstart, and he kind of is very flippant and so on. But even he has complex philosophy to kind of offer. To that, what I have to say is that's a sort of elitism and snobbery with which we are affected sometimes when we think of these people, because if anything, they have more complex ideas and deeper philosophies to offer than I think the typical urbanite. I mean, again, I'm not generalizing urbanites here, but in terms of how we tend to compartmentalize or stereotype people, it's totally untrue. Because I've seen people speak about very, very deep stuff in an extremely nonchalant way. Absolutely. Right. And this particularly happens in central India, where I think Hindi is an amazing language which gives a lot of room, just like any Indian languages. A lot of room for poetic latitudes. And I've seen people speaking in fables, people speaking in poetry. In fact, one guide once took my name and recited a poem back to me to welcome me to the park that I was going to. Right? He said, "Hriday mein bhi Santosh, ped mein bhi Santosh, har jagah Santosh, Santosh, abhi jeep mein bhi Santosh." So, and this comes completely naturally to them, and it's not just serious stuff, by the way, like you said, it's even witty stuff. For instance, my favorite driver once described the sight of a tiger lying on his back as "Asman roke ke soya hai." So, as though the tiger is actually holding the sky aloft while sleeping. So these guys are an absolute gold mine of material that you can then use, and like a potter, you just shape it into a particular shape and just give it form.
No, I think probably, I don't know the percentage, but probably out of 100 photographers, I don't know many who could get the nuances so well. With a bit of experience I had when we were in Kollur Mukambika forest, and we were actually doing a documentary on a forester who had been there for 40 years and he was retiring. So the amount of, not just the foresters, even the guards, and I think it was not related to safari, but the depth of understanding that they have on the forest, the way it comes out in terms of philosophies and how they actually see life. It even trickles down to their personal lives, like how they see their personal challenges, and everything goes back to, oh, this I saw in the wild and this is what is happening. Now talking about it, so I think I might be wrong here, but Santosh Saligram, if you Google, right, you see amazing pictures. I mean, you've done, I know that it's very unfair to really sort of put you in that sort of bucket or category of photographer, but while writing the book, how much the photographer in you led some of the parts in the story, or whether was there his existence at all? Because I know I'm repeating it many times, but it's really very visual in some places. Only a photographer who just doesn't click, shutter button, because I think in your case, you don't need a camera. I mean, because camera really narrows down your perception. You really have, I think, I know when we talk about the wildlife photography, it's all about that just zoomed in picture with the tiger complete frame. But I think your story is all about wide angle. It's 360 degree, right? So did the photographer take lead in some of those instances, or was it always the writer in Santosh? Or how was it?
I wouldn't say photography, but I would probably say photographic memory, because it's like if I were to ask any of you to describe your home, either from the outside or from the inside, will you be able to do it perfectly? Yes? Have you ever used a camera shooting your home and all that? Not really, right? It's like that for me. Places of central India are exactly like that. Thanks. I mean, so many dreams before going, and experiences while being there, memories after coming back, everything assimilated into this one giant khichdi which has entered my blood vessels and residing there. So I just have to kind of pull it out from there. So not really much from a photography perspective. In fact, I was very conscious of the fact that there is no character in the book who's a photographer, really. I mean, there's no important character. There's one who comes when they miss the sighting very passingly. But I just want to keep that for a different discussion. So I didn't want to bring that angle in here, because that itself is an entire gigantic universe in itself. So it was largely the writer and the rememberer, the reminiscer in me, which was talking.
Wow, I don't think, I mean, anyone else, I mean, it couldn't have been said better. And I think you also, as I said in the beginning, the book is about safari. It's not about wildlife photography, because it's so unfortunate that in recent times, I think we really sort of, they become synonymous. The moment we talk about safari, it's about photographs. But I think you really have taken it to a level where it's about being there. I think being really about, like mindful about what's happening. Now let's flip it. I think you also, I remember asking you asking in Instagram poll as well. So any idea or any thoughts about actually making it a short film or something? Because it's going to be amazing. I mean, especially if it comes out in Hindi or even the local languages, it's going to be really nice. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely a lot of thoughts and hopes, but no action so far. Certainly, I mean, I recognize that a lot of people like to consume material as film because it's more visual, and not everybody is into reading, which is absolutely okay. I mean, people have different ways of consuming stories, and there are other things which you can bring into the table or the palette of storytelling which you cannot do in books, just the way that's true for film as well. So certainly there is an intent and a dream to tell the same story in the form of film, but it's too early to talk about it at this stage.
No, I think we all really would wait for it. It's going to be well. I think it's. I hope it really matches with the visual sort of perception that we get when we read the book. I'm sure it will. So that's really great to know. And I also I was just thinking when I was reading this, and also when we are talking about the whole language stuff. This book is going to be so great to sort of keep in those those reserve forests as well. I mean, I think even if you translate it, right? I think it's a story. Hope these stories will be read by the Bhole Rams and the Makhans, because I think it's, and the what's the word, like how in the city there are so many invisible characters, the lift operators and the drivers and so many people. This is really characterizing some of the most important characters, and I think this book really reaches them as well. I'm sure you also must be thinking about it as well. So I think, I mean, I could talk about it for so long. There were even much more sort of deeply philosophical questions I had, but I think maybe can keep it for other sort of conversation as well. Last question maybe before we open it up to audience. Doesn't have to be one or two things, but if you put yourself as a reader, like all of us, and Santosh has written this book, some other Santosh with equal characters and qualities. So what do you want us to sort of, as in, I don't know, take away or something which you think I wish people would get it. Maybe I've got some of them, but are there any things you're like, okay, it's great to get it? And just a follow-up question to that, if you can answer together, is what next for Santosh as a writer as well? So
okay. This is a very fundamental question. I mean, what is the purpose of a story? Really, I think is the general way of putting it. I mean, is it education? Is it social change and reform? Yeah. Is it entertainment? What is it? I think stories are essential to us as human beings because I think they unlock parts of our minds and hearts which we may not be in touch with through direct means. I think that is how the whole culture of fables and parables and stories passed on by word, unwritten stories and mythologies have sort of come into existence. So I really don't have a very specific purpose for the book, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart. I just want a reader to take it as any other story, not as a preachy one for sure, at any rate. I'm certainly not trying to change people or change behavior, but I think one thing which I would love to happen as a result is probably a little more awareness of what ecotourism is like from someone else's point of view, because when you go in as an ignorant tourist, of course you're completely innocent and you're blameless because you don't know better. I mean, that's how you are. So hopefully this gives the reader a perspective of what not to do when you're there, and where perhaps they can be a little more empathetic and not get carried away by the purpose that they have made so big in their heads of seeing a tiger at any cost. But I mean, if I were to have a slightly, sorry to cut you and interrupt myself, have a loftier vision for the book, I certainly want to draw attention to the socio-economic disparity that you mentioned very rightly, and specifically the absence of tourist income reaching the locals. This is a very, very serious problem that we have in all our national parks. Particularly in central India, where a lot of things are privatized, but despite that, this does not really happen. In Kenya, for instance, there are things like conservancies, where the whole model of tourism is built on the intent of giving back to the community. I think we need to do more of that here in India. Certainly, it's absolutely about time that we did that, particularly in regions of central India, which are greatly impoverished, particularly compared to southern India. So that is probably a larger, loftier vision that I would be thrilled if it were met through the book.
Just what next for Santosh?
Oh, right. No. I mean, I'm definitely not. Even in movies, I'm very, very skeptical about sequels unless Nolan is working on one of them, and it's the Dark Knight trilogy or something. So I'm not thinking of a sequel at this point, although rather interestingly, there is a sort of a postscript to what happens at the end that I have in mind, which I may bring in to other versions of the story at a future date. That's very interesting as well. I'll tell you offline. Unfortunately, I cannot reveal it here. But other than that, I haven't really thought of what more to do with this story at this stage. There are other projects, of course, I have.
No, thanks, Santosh. I think the essence, just the previous question, the way you answered, it has come out really, really well. And someone who was pretty new to it, I could get it. I mean, the whole the lens of socioeconomic and the nuances of life. I think it's come out really nicely, and I think it served its purpose more than it could have. So now I think it's time to hear it out from. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Congratulations, Santosh. So I'm really excited for the book after hearing you talk about it, and being a safari buff myself, it looks like a story that I'm really going to dive into. Firstly, I would like to thank you for bringing notice about the traditional ecological knowledge that these locals have. That is something that is honestly overlooked, and that is my observation too when I go on safaris and I see, again, not generalizing urbanists, but yeah, it's a great point that you've got out, and I hope people get the point. And the social awareness that you are raising through fiction is also really good, because I always look at innovative and new ways of getting across messages of conservation and awareness, either through fiction or photography or writing. So you've done, looks like you've done a brilliant job with that. And knowing how hard that you and Saraba work, and you two are really somebody who I look up to when it comes to your talent and creativity, and how amazing you guys are as writers. Now there is something that I would like to ask you. What do you do when you get the writer's note?
Oh man, that's the question no writer can answer. I've been watching YouTube videos myself, trying to crack that. I have a slightly controversial take on this, perhaps, which may not work for everybody, because people don't like hearing this answer of giving up. But unfortunately, that's exactly what it is. But by that, I don't mean negatively. I think sometimes if something's not working out very easily, you might have to look elsewhere. That's been my experience. I think my best work certainly has been, of course, every writer has to be capable. Every writer worth their salt, especially if it's their profession, and we're doing it in a corporate environment especially, has to be capable of sitting down and writing at will a certain piece of writing or literature that is required for a certain purpose. But when we speak about creative writing, I think it's extremely important to become a conduit of something greater that wants to flow through you. And maybe when you have a writer's block, you want to sit and let that happen instead of searching for something, is what I feel. Because I had about 5 different stubs written in my note in my phone, like I mentioned earlier, and yet this is the one that actually came to me. If I had tried to write or elaborate into a novella, or even a short story, forget a novella, one of the other stories, I don't think it would have worked, because I just couldn't hear the words. So perhaps changing the topic of your writing itself to something more in line with what nature wants written through you might work.
What nature wants to.
Yes.
First of all, thank you, Santosh, for writing the book.
Thank you.
I'm picking up certain words from whatever you guys discussed. Although you said that I don't want this to be a message, but I feel this book must be read far and wide.
Thank you.
Because as a person who has gone on safari and not seen even one tiger, and I came back dejected saying that, oh, I didn't see a tiger, all of us should read this book.
Yes.
For that reason, I think this must be read by everybody.
Thank you.
There are certainly messages. I mean, this is for all the audience who have not read the book. There are a lot of messages. But when you messages ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಸಕ್ಕರೆ ಪಾಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಆ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ನೀವು ಓದಬೇಕು ಆ ತರ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀರಾ. Because we know how sweet a person Santosh is, and this book is also as sweet as that.
Thank you.
And other point that I want to make is this was a breezy read for me. Usually I take about, if not months, at least I take weeks to finish a book. I literally read this in few days. Because I got it last Sunday and I finished it, and it was a breezy read, and I literally mean it again. When I was reading it, I could feel that morning breeze sitting in an open jeep and traveling. And yeah, again picking up some of the words, yeah, you were relatable, you were relevant, you were real, okay? And there could have been chances that you could have made it more dramatic. You did not make it. Okay, I still have one question: how to hold the tiger in one place? Maybe we can discuss that.
Ask Mr. Baig, maybe. Right.
How to have that by safari, right? Sure. Okay, but coming to the point that I'm losing my train of thought. But this is again for the audience. Without letting the cats out of the bag, I know they're already out here. The biggest drama in the book is not about the tigers or elephants. Read the book, you will know what the biggest drama. And that was a brilliant thing. And how you ended that was also brilliant. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, there are many questions, but I will ask afterwards.
Hi.
I haven't read your book, but here's my question. You said something about the Boleram having the philosophy, right? So is this something that has to do with ecosophy, the understanding of the scape about wilderness? I mean, if it's not that, how do they understand this whole sort of, what is their response towards this tourism and the scape of forest? So that is my question.
Right. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Good question. So you see, the whole thing about philosophy, again, Shri very beautifully explained the etymology of the word safari, right? I think the etymology of the word philosophy is equally beautiful and significant. It actually literally means love of wisdom. And I think wisdom is the operative word here with Boleram, and with most people in the jungles that I have met. They have truckloads of it, bucket loads of it, and that is not the sort of airy-fairy wisdom which is written in books and highly intellectual and high-strung, highbrow, that sort of thing. No, it may seem fatalistic at times, and fatalism is sort of philosophical escapism because you say, okay, it is the way it is, so what can be done about it? It's not that, because that is a very surface level philosophy. It's about accepting wholeheartedly everything that is, whether it's in your favor or not, and whether it's the way that you want it or imagined or not. And that is exactly what Boleram is capable of. And that is exactly why, even though he has absolutely no idea from where he's going to bring food to the table the very next day, he's not really worried about it, or in fact he's carried by a greater, more compelling status in his life currently of having seen something which he wasn't expecting to see, simply because he lives in the present. And we talk a lot about living in the present and so on in intellectual circles, spiritual circles and all of that. But these people, scarily, are actually capable of it. And Boleram's one of them. So his philosophy is just to live in the moment, really, if you want to articulate it.
Any more questions?
Any question that you wanted to ask and you never asked? Go for it.
Yeah, because of the travesties that we were discussing that exist in ecotourism, and you're someone who has witnessed it in various contexts within India. Karnataka is so different from Madhya Pradesh, right? And you mentioned Africa. So conservationists have been crying hoarse about how ecotourism and conservation need not be at loggerheads, but actually work in tandem. Because you've seen both sides of the story, you've also worked very closely with governments and forest departments as well. So where do you think lie the challenges on the ground? I know this could be a bit tricky. I don't know how much of it you can reveal, but if you can, could you spill some details?
Right, challenges in terms of unbalanced tourism, imbalanced tourism.
Basically, you said the money that goes into tourism
Okay,
is not reaching out to, it's not trickling
Okay,
down to
okay.
the last person.
Sure.
Where do you see the hiccups as someone who's witnessed this so closely?
Right. Okay, I'll stick my neck out and I'll be very, very specific about this, which is a huge peril to my life actually. I think a part of the park entrance fee should go straight away to the locals, which doesn't happen. The park entrance fee straight away goes to the exchequer, and of course thereon to perhaps some very fat babu's pocket. Or in the best case scenario, yes, to the greater good of humanity in India, to someone who has absolutely nothing to do with conservation or tourism or wildlife or nature or anything at all. Maybe some flyover in a place where it's not required, or even for a watchtower inside a forest which is not required. But anything except the person who actually needs it and who has the single biggest power to make a difference, which is the local living alongside the wildlife. So I would say that's a good starting point. I'm not saying that's the panacea for all our problems. Sort of assigning a part of the park entrance fee to the locals will not solve all of our problems. But I think that's a good direction to proceed in, and I think a step that we should take immediately, because the paltry allowance that these guides get in most of these places is ridiculously insufficient and inadequate, and nothing really changes from that. So yeah, that's one thing I would do immediately.
If I can just add a detail that I just remember from about 10 years ago. Santosh didn't even know that people like Shripathy Hadigal existed. This was when a bunch of us kids would read poetry, Persian poetry, to what Santosh would write on his Facebook. We would spend hours and hours into the night. And Shripathy and I always used to fight about Santosh being the photographer first and the writer first. So Shripathy was always like, no, Santosh is first the photographer that he is. And I'm like, no, he's the writer. So I guess this book really establishes him as an author of a genre that is so nebulous and so nascent. I see a hand up there. Do you have a question?
Oh.
Do you? So, yeah, I was saying that because wildlife fiction is such a nebulous genre, I think it's very brave of you to make that your genre, your very first attempt, your maiden novella. I really applaud you for that. Yeah, like you get a lot of non-fiction. Like you can see probably like a whole shelf of that, and you have fantasy fiction, the Lion King, and everything you can imagine. So it is wildlife fiction. I hope you guys pick up a copy. And a little bit of shameless marketing here. So, what else? No questions from the filmmakers and artists. Oh, okay, yeah, we have.
Okay, hey,
Yeah, please ask.
The topic was very nice and I liked it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey, okay, Santosh.
Yes.
First of all, congratulations. I think this is,
Thank you.
this was years, I think, in the making. So, really happy to see you come out with this book.
Thank you.
No questions on the book, obviously, because I've not read it, so I'm sure I'll have quite a few. But one sort of a question that I had was that I'm sure in all your characters, in the human characters that you've included in the book, you would have had shades, you would have included shades of folks that you've met and
Yes.
seen and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But knowing you, I also know that you had a lot of animal characters that you were in love with, right? You are probably in love with, right? You always had names for tigresses and stuff like that. B2 and the Chakradhara female and all that. Saurabha, by the way, Chakradhara female was a tigress, okay, just to add that. Give that clarity.
All right.
So did you deliberately include their behavior, things like that in the characters, in the animal characters that you might have probably included in the book, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, a very good question. Thank you, Pramod. Yes, there are a couple of Easter eggs, I would say, of I don't know if it's going to be a spoiler, but one of the tigresses has a limp and has an injured eye, which is inspired by Kankati, the real tigress from Bandhavgarh. But otherwise, not really, because what I quickly realized was that if this ends up becoming some sort of a thesis on tiger behavior and even tiger personality for that matter, we find it very colorful and interesting because we're lovers of tigers. But to a person who's perhaps not so connected, he or she might very quickly switch off, thinking, okay, this is too much detail, this is too much pedantic stuff, which is why I kind of consciously refrained from doing that, although I have a different idea as to how I can possibly do that in the future. But here, such details have only been used in a sprinkling as mainly devices to move the story forward, but not really to serve the character itself. I wanted to keep that to the minimum.
This might be a little silly, but
No.
I'm a nature lover and I can remember vividly the first safari that was life changing and turning point for that development of
Yes.
what was it for you? Do you have any memorable safari incident and that inspired the book?
Right. Yes, definitely. Although I can't really pinpoint which one changed me the most, or because it's a slow burn, right? Life is a slow burn, and you kind of gather bits and pieces as you go, and it just constantly happens to you. Or Saurabha would say it's a happening, the way she puts it. So I can't really pinpoint, but yes, certainly the formative years where my first few safaris happened. First in Nagarhole, of course, Pramod was there when we saw the first wild tiger of my life. Funnily enough, Mario was there, who was not really a safari regular, in the most unexpected of circumstances. Visiting Kanha in 2006, I would say, was life-changing, because that is where all these crazy things happened. The waiter asking, how many tigers did you see today? Only 5? Okay. We saw 6 this morning. And that sort of thing. And seeing a tiger from up close without actually the tiger running away from you. That was really something crazy. Like these cats, it's quite a wonder that they're actually not running away from us right now, because most cats, that's what they do. And certainly tigers in the wild, and that's what we were used to. But suddenly seeing a tiger giving all its time, not running away, being able to see behavior, was really life-changing, incredible. Thanks.
Okay, wow, that's a wrap.
Not a question, but to back up what
Right.
he said, when you actually say life-changing, well, I actually quit my career
Right.
as a jewelry designer
Right.
and got into conservation after I saw my first tiger as well. So So yeah, it is
Yeah,
life changing.
Nice, nice. Yeah, absolutely. It's career changing as well.
I'm sure some of you will have questions to Santosh offline. You can always send your questions to me or Santosh directly, and maybe we can do a YouTube video later so that we cover more topics, because I feel like we're just merely scratching the surface here and there's so much more just to talk about. Again, thank you so much for coming. It's a full house and I'm so happy on Saturday evening. 3 months that he was absent, I think you guys sort of made it up because he was in the next room and I didn't have access to him. So it's so nice to see the book finally out there, and there's a whole section of the bookshelf there that has his book. So any feedback, brutally honest feedback, appreciation, everything is welcome. So thanks again. I'll see you.
I guess we should thank Krishna once again.
Yeah, I know. Krishna sir, Bunny. Okay, Bengaluru, bookman of Bengaluru. Again, I insist that you watch that. Here's the thing. On a Saturday evening, when most of his customers are in the shop, he gives this much space to book events. He doesn't even let us pay for the coffee or the snacks or whatever it is that he gets. And everybody, Preetam, Shashidhar, everybody, the staff, they're so friendly, they're so warm. It's pretty much like coming home. For me, this has been a home of 12 years. So we've done 2 more events before, and they also support local literature, local artists as well. So please follow them on their social media. Keep an eye out on the event of Captain here. I'm sure you'll have a fabulous time. So here we go. Thanks again. And a very good night.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our MC, Saurabha, for doing a great job. And thank you to Trishala, Abhilasha, who are on the cameras. Thank you so much. And of course, thanks to Shripathy for being such a fantastic host. Thank you. Good night.